The morning it all started, my truck rolled out of my driveway and into the street without me. I watched it drift past the mailbox like something on a string, breath caught in my chest, and for a second I couldn't tell if the world had gone sideways or I had finally lost my mind. Then I saw her, Evelyn Hart, standing on her porch with that look people get when they think the rules were written just for them. And for the first time I understood how small acts pile up until one little shove becomes a cliff. I'd fixed that old Ford for 2 years, every weekend after work, every spare dollar toward parts and paint, and I knew the lines on that hood the way some folks know the face of a loved one. To me, it wasn't flexing. It was a ledger of time, of mornings hunched under the hood with a coffee gone cold. Evelyn saw it differently, as a display, a provocation, something to be diminished. That's what the neighborhood had become under her watch. Rules, signs, a committee of people who liked being in charge more than they liked being neighbors. We live in a tidy development, trimmed hedges, mailboxes in a row, that painted sameness that promises safety and gives you someone to complain to. Evelyn's husband used to be on the HOA board until he wasn't. Evelyn still acted like the title stuck to her. She had friends who nodded like benchwarmers at a court, and she liked to remind people of precedent. "We don't tolerate that here," she'd say, as if the world needed her to point that out. What she didn't know was how buried my patience was, how many small slights I'd swallowed until that morning, until she sent her adult son Logan Hart rolling my truck down the street like a message. When I ran out, bare feet on cold pavement, I caught Logan in the driver's seat grinning like stealing candy is still a kid's game. He had that entitled ease you can see it in the set of a man's shoulders when no one's ever told him no. I grabbed the door before he could start it, really grabbed it, and he looked up and said, "Relax, it's a prank. She's filming." He laughed like I was the joke. My voice came out tight. "Get out. That's my truck." He shrugged, like words were an inconvenience. Evelyn came down the porch at that, all pearls and judgment. Now, she said, the kind of voice that's been practiced in mirror reflections. "We can all be reasonable." Reasonable from her, the word meant compliance. She had neighbors who'd traded the messy work of community for the neatness of obedience. She wanted my truck tucked into the neatness. I wanted my truck back where it belonged, keys in my hand and an answer in her mouth. It turned into a standoff at the end of my driveway. 2 houses, a strip of cracked asphalt, and more history than a single morning should hold. I told her about the dents, about the fresh scrape on the rim, about the feeling of watching something you've built being treated like a prop. Logan rolled his eyes and said, "You should calm down, man. It's not that deep." That line, "not that deep," landed like a slap because it was. To Evelyn and her crew, nothing was deep because they never had to be the one appending their life to fix what got broken. Her threats were subtle at first. "You know how these things work," she said, eyebrow arched. "Rules. Community. We could file a complaint." It sounded bureaucratic, like a paper cut, but the intent behind it was sharp. Make the rules into tools and use them to grind you down. When I asked her to look at the damage, to own it, and take responsibility, she laughed, a flick of a laugh that didn't meet her eyes. I called the city's non-emergency line. I told the dispatcher my truck had been taken, that there was property damage. The operator asked if anyone had threatened me. I thought about Logan's smirk, Evelyn's posture, how power thinks it can intimidate by simply existing. I said no, because I was still trying to keep this from being a larger thing. That choice to contain rather than explode would become a hinge in the story. But containment only works so long in a place where someone's always cataloging your faults and sending notices to your mailbox. 2 days later, a letter arrived from the HOA. A simple notice about vehicle storage and community standards. They quoted bylaws with the confidence of people who'd never read them in a courtroom, just memorized the lines that could be pointed at. I called back the numbers I'd been given, and the minutes spun into hold music and instructions about how to file an appeal. The system was there to look fair, but the scales were loaded by people like Evelyn who knew how to steer a process toward the side of their choosing. That afternoon, when I confronted her again, it got heated. "You used my truck," I said. "You didn't ask." "It was parked," she replied. "We were testing the bodywork." Testing the bodywork. As if the dignity of my work was a laboratory sample. Logan stood behind her like a shield. Then he said something that stuck. "People like you don't know how to behave around people like us." There was the ethos of entitlement, the script. You adjust, or you are adjusted. I made a choice then that surprised me. Instead of letting it stew, I decided to take it public. Not on social media, I didn't want a circus, but at the next neighborhood meeting. I gathered photos, timestamps, a record of the complaint. I wanted facts, not melodrama, because facts are hard to argue with. I wanted to show that this wasn't a funny prank or a neighborly squabble. It was a pattern. The night of the meeting, the room smelled like stale coffee and the anxious perfume of people used to choosing sides. Evelyn arrived with a friend on each arm, her armor of approval, and the board shuffled papers like a judge setting the docket. When I spoke, I kept it steady. This is my truck. It's damaged. I want it fixed, I said, and felt the quiet click when people decide whether to be interested. I showed pictures of the scrape, of the skid marks, of Logan behind the wheel. I explained the timeline. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I just laid it out. Evelyn smiled the smile of someone who has practiced being patient with ordinary grievances. "We'll investigate," she said, which in HOA language translates to "will delay." That night, I drove past her house and found my truck parked in her driveway, hoodless in the gloom, taillights cold. I should have knocked. I should have called for a cop, but something in me still wanted conversation, wanted negotiation. I walked up her path, and there was Logan, leaning, cigarette in hand. He'd taken to smoking since he'd been old enough to feel like a protagonist in someone else's story. "You shouldn't have pressed it in the meeting," he said. "You made this personal." I told him what made it personal was that people like him treated other people's lives like props. He pushed my shoulder. Not hard, not criminal, but enough. Enough to know the division between neighbor and adversary had been crossed. When the officer finally came, and yes, I called this time, everything was already a wound open to the air. The officer listened, patient and careful. He took notes that seemed to mean nothing, and then something, and for the first time I saw Logan's face shift. Entitlement warps like old plaster when the elements get in. Logan's bravado cracked. "We were just testing," he said. "I didn't mean to." His sentence trailed like a car running out of gas. The officer's tone was flat and final. "We don't decide who gets to test whose property," he said. "If you took it without permission, that's theft." That word landed heavier than any complaint or notice. Theft. It turned the evening into a ledger of acts that could be counted. Evelyn, who'd been all diplomatic armor, went pale. She told the officer she'd arranged a test drive with the owner, the audacity of saying you arranged theft with the owner, and the officer kept his eyes on her like he was watching someone try to switch a story mid-play. Logan was cited, and for the first time the neighborhood felt like a place where rules might matter beyond their usefulness to a few. People whispered when they saw him leave with that summons in hand. Evelyn retreated behind a curtained life. The pearls seemed like a costume now. I stood on my porch watching the taillights vanish and felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. Justice had been served in a small, banal way, and yet the victory tasted thin because the tissue of neighborliness had been torn. In the days that followed, there were more letters, more grievances filed by both sides. Evelyn called a meeting to discuss community standards, and half the room came and listened harder than they had before. People who had been looking down at their phones during HOA meetings now looked up. Maybe it was the sight of a grown man being held to account, or maybe it was that quiet fear they recognized, the fear of being the next one whose life could be rearranged under the guise of the rules. I didn't get an apology. That was a dream I had early and set aside. What I got instead was a small repair check in the mail and a note short, clipped offering community mediation. Evelyn's note was perfectly polite. Its edges were razor sharp. Logan never looked me in the eye again. The Bradford pears down the street dropped their petals like confetti for something ended. Sitting on my porch that evening, I thought about the shape of things. People talk about community like it's a place you arrive at together, but mostly it's a set of negotiations, everyday bargaining around dignity and space. Some people try to win by making rules into weapons. Some people win by showing up with facts and steadiness. I don't know which is the truer victory. I know that I sleep better knowing my truck is where it should be, and I know I wake with a wariness I didn't have before. There's a scene I replay in my head: Logan's hand on the steering wheel, his grin like a dare, Evelyn's porch light painting them in gold. It's cinematic, I suppose, but it's only cinematic until you're the one who has to sweep up the mess. The climax wasn't a fistfight or a dramatic courtroom spectacle. It was a tired officer reading a charge. Sometimes the most satisfying movie moments are the ones that are small and final: a paper signed, a siren winding down the street, someone who thought they were above consequences learning they are not. I won't pretend everything is cleaned up. Evelyn's influence still lingers, neighbors still murmur when the HOA sends a reminder, and there are still evenings where I catch myself checking the driveway twice. But something shifted. People who were neutral had decided neutrality was expensive. They started to speak, to ask questions. That's the thing. Justice here was less about punishment and more about resetting expectations, about nudging a community toward fairness rather than favoritism. So if you take anything from this, it's this: put your work behind a lock or a ledger, document everything, and when you have to, stand up in public with facts. Be calm, be human, but be ready to make the small, boring choices that end up mattering. And also, don't let the polite threats of people wearing status silence you. Those threats are designed to make you feel alone while they gather support. What I can't tell you yet, and what keeps me awake sometimes, is whether this will be a turning point or just an episode. Will Evelyn learn that wielding community rules as weapons turns neighbors into enemies? Will Logan grow out of his smirk or double down? I don't know. Some folks will say I escalated, that I made a mountain out of a dent. Others will say I stood my ground. That's why I want to hear from you. Tell me what you think. Was I right to push the matter into the open? Was calling the officer too far? Should I have tried to patch things quietly and accept the repair check? Drop your thoughts below, be honest, and if you've been through something like this, tell me what worked for you. Share this with someone who's in a neighborhood with too many rules and not enough respect. If you liked the story, hit like and subscribe for more of these real, messy neighborhood sagas, and if you didn't, well, tell me why. I'm listening.